delighted to introduce Jennifer Gibson, who's Executive Director of Dryad and Chair of the OASPA Board. Jen is going to moderate our opening panel, which is going to take a progress check on open access. And I'll leave Jen to describe it more fully, but we're looking forward to hearing about the key themes that have emerged, the progress that we've made, and importantly, where do we see some promising solutions? So really key topics for the OASPA community. With a stellar panel to take on these topics with the thoughtfulness and the benefits of their expertise, I'm delighted to hand the floor over to you, Jen.
Thank you so much, Claire. This is going to be great. I'll just offer a few comments to get us going. So it is certainly my honor to moderate the session that follows. I'd like to express my gratitude to the program organizers for the invitation. I just want to say a couple of things to set the context. So first is that this conversation really does build on the introspection that OASPA is doing that Claire referred to, and I'd say it's a journey of the last several years, culminating in the last several months. So we've learned a lot as a community in the last several years, and I'd say in particular through the OASPA meeting, which has been a forum for us to convene the wider global community committed to knowledge creation and knowledge sharing. So the benefit of having all these folks together has been to change our perspectives. And what that has meant for OASPA as an organization is the articulation of a new vision and a new strategy that the board is working on now. So this conversation today makes a lot of sense. Again, credit to the program organizers. And our challenge is to turn back and look at some of the recurring themes from the OASPA meeting year on year and see how we might convert talk into action and hold ourselves accountable to some of the things that we aspire to in our conversations. So those themes today, there are many that we wish we had more time, but we're going to speak directly to the topics of equity, open infrastructure, and researcher engagement. So we have a fantastic panel assembled, and I'll invite the panelists to introduce themselves in just a moment. We have about 72 minutes. After the introductions, I will pose a question to each of the panelists. They will each have a few minutes to respond, and then if we can, I'm going to throw a poll out to the audience to get your feedback on each of the themes. I do encourage you to please chat amongst yourselves in the chat. If you have any questions, go ahead and please put those in the Q&A. And panelists, please go ahead and respond to those questions if you have the opportunity in parallel with the discussion. We will pause after each theme, and Lucy Oates on the program committee will help me to highlight questions to focus our speakers' attention in between themes. Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and get started. I feel that each of the panelists will be able to speak more effectively to their own perspectives and to why they feel they make what they have to say to today's conversation. So I will start with Moumita. Moumita, would you mind please introducing yourself to the assembly today?
Yeah. Thank you, Jen. Yeah, of course. Hello and warm welcome to all joining us from around the globe. And I would really like to thank OASPA for the work that they have done, and also for inviting us today to this diverse panel. And we hope to bring out some interesting conversation and discussion, which will then be turned into action. Now about introducing myself. So I'm an STI policy researcher, working at Department of Science and Technology Center for Policy Research at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, India. And I'm also a consultant with International Science Council for the Future of Scientific Publishing project. But by training, I trained in science. So my PhD is in chemistry, precisely as in organic chemistry. After my PhD and postdoc in the Vienna University of Technology, when I got back to my country, India, I struggled to access research paper. And that was really a wake-up call for me. And I started wondering about how our scientific community works and what's really, is it really inclusive and fair for everyone? The reason I'm here today is to highlight that I don't feel that open access is just about a barrier-free participation in reading or publishing. I see open access movement as something much beyond. It provides us, the researchers, an opportunity to question the whole publishing and assessment practices, which essentially are the backbone of our scientific ecosystem. Now we can ask ourselves the question, like, do we measure the quality of research by where it is published, like some high impact journal, or by how many citations it has? Instead, we should really be focusing on the quality of peer review, the actual credibility and utility of the research that we are doing and publishing, and how quickly can we share our credible knowledge. And of course, let's also think about more improvement in the process and maybe more innovation into the whole process. For example, I believe that open peer review is really one important solution. So anyway, the bottom line, I want to convey is that knowledge is for everyone. It's a public good. It should benefit everyone. And we need to act accordingly. And that's how I would end here and hand over to Jen.
Thanks very much, Moumita. I really appreciate the crystallization of the views from each speakers because we have so little time to represent the richness of material today. Peter, may I ask you to go next, please?
Sure. I want to thank OASPA for inviting me. I am a big fan of OASPA. I spoke at its first meeting back in 2008, and I'm glad to come back and speak again. I've worked on open access for more than 20 years. And before that, I was a professor of philosophy for more than 20 years. And I was introduced to the dysfunction of the current academic publishing system as a publishing scholar. And as a tenured senior professor of philosophy, I stepped down from my position in order to work full-time on open access. So I've now spent just about as much time full-time on open access as I formerly spent as a philosophy professor. I worked under grants for some of that time in the beginning after leaving my philosophy position. And then I took a job at Harvard leading the Office for Scholarly Communication. I stepped down last year because I'm getting old and I'm semi-retired now, but I'm still working for the cause. And I'll just say briefly what my top 7 priorities are for open access these days, in no particular order. Adopting open access policies at more funding agencies and universities, and where they already exist, strengthening those open access policies, preferably using rights retention policies. Next, moving beyond APC-based business models for open access journals. Next, growing non-APC open access journals, which we sometimes call diamond open access journals. Growing repository-based open access, which we sometimes call green open access. And I mean this for both preprints and peer-reviewed postprints. Next, hosting open access research on open infrastructure. And where it isn't already hosted there, moving it to open access infrastructure. And where open infrastructure isn't good enough, improving it so that we can rely on it in the future. Next, reforming research assessment, for example, promotion and tenure procedures, in order to change incentives for researchers. Echoing something Moumita just said, caring more about the research itself than where it's published. And finally, correcting longstanding and harmful misunderstandings about open access itself.
Thanks very much, Peter. Welcome. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself next, please?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. We've got 2 minutes each. Jen was very precise about that, so I'm going to keep an eye on my clock while I introduce myself. Lovely to see you all. A little bit about me. I'm an academic by training. So 20 odd years ago, I was in the lab and I was wondering where to publish, and I was accessing research papers through my library. And I remember going to see if there was papers I could photocopy, whoever remembers that, so I could read them and take them home. And sometimes you had access to the papers and sometimes you didn't, because it depended on whether your university library had access or not. That when I left the lab and moved into publishing, you sort of see the world from a different side while still remembering all your colleagues and friends who are still working in academic research. And I spent many years as an editor at Nature, and then moved into the publishing team. And during that time, I was lucky enough to work in the beginning of open access at the Nature journals and launched Nature Communications and Scientific Reports. And I remember always thinking and hearing that the switch to OA was about 5 years away. Now, this was back in like 2008, right? The switch to OA was always 5 years away. And whenever we had a conference or a meeting, it was still always 5 years away. And that sort of stayed the same over the last 15 years. And now we're at this moment in time where OA is here, open access is here, and it's real and it's live. And it's addressing some of those issues I found when I was in a lab trying to access research papers. And we're seeing this adoption of new journals and new ways of presenting work, which really address everything that the researcher needs today to present their work to whoever they are around the globe. The reason this is important is because obviously it increases access and reduces inequality in accessing the work. But one thing that's been flagged is it can increase issues around inequality in a different type of way, as in who can pay to publish that work. And I think that's something we'll touch on as we go through the talks today. But one thing I want to sort of mention is we always sort of talk about open access really speeding up how quickly we can solve some of the world's biggest problems. And we actually saw that during COVID. We saw that during the pandemic when a lot of the work was made freely available to all. And I think we could see the power there of what open research can mean to the academic community if anyone and everyone can access the work that's relevant to solving some of the biggest problems that we might be facing over the years to come. Looking forward to the discussion, can't wait. I think I stuck to time, so I'm going to hand back to Jen, and thanks very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanos, hello.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you very much for this invitation to OASPA. I'm also a fan of OASPA, I have to say at the opening. So my name is Thanos Giannakopoulos. I am the Chief Librarian of the UN Headquarters Library here in New York and Information Management Section. Our work is mostly the dissemination of the outputs of the main bodies of the United Nations. My section is also the convener of the United Nations Open Science Conference, which we delivered in collaboration with the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the Division of Sustainable Development Goals, and UNESCO. So what I wanted to say is that at this very moment, I think probably a quarter of an hour ago, world leaders started coming together here in New York to seek compromise and solutions to the challenges that humanity faces, and there are many. We are halfway through implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, that is the 2030 Agenda for a Better Future for our world. And only about 15% of the targets, 15% of the whole targets put forward in the SDGs have been achieved so far. The latest SDGs Global Report stressed the need for science to accelerate transformation towards sustainable development. It was written by a group of 15 scientists who advocated for synthesizing science effectively, basing policy on science, supporting science to analyze what is going wrong, strengthening the science-polity society interface, and enhancing free access to scientific results for all, including publications. I want to emphasize, I mean, we could say a lot of things about these points that were put forward in the report, but I want to emphasize the need for universal and immediate open access to scientific outputs, no strings attached. This principle has been many times put forward by international organizations and other global or national bodies. This is a crucial element for achieving the open science principles, a core value for which is open access to scientific results. Not the least, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states clearly we should all benefit from the advancement of science. Given the many crises facing the planet, especially climate change, access to scientific knowledge remains key for human development, if not for survival nowadays. And yet, only approximately 1/3 of world scientific outputs are currently accessible. I think we need to step up when it comes to open access to scientific outputs. Thank you.
Thanos, thank you. Thank you all for your time. I'm so grateful to have the chance to have this discussion. So let's dig in. Let's talk about equity first. So Claire in her opening remarks spoke to our shared experience, and Malavika, congratulations on your work so far. Malavika is going to give this topic much better representation in other parts of the conference than I could attempt to. I'll just attempt to summarize in saying that in the pursuit of open access to all scholarship over the last 20 odd years, some of the practices that have been adopted, that we've adopted, have inhibited or prohibited participation by different communities around the world. So my first question for our panelists today is, in your opinion, what is the most significant form of inequity in open access publishing, and what are the most promising initiatives to alleviate that inequity? So again, we're here to really hone in on some of the barriers and the challenges that we've circled around at this meeting over the years, but now we want to talk about what's next. So Peter, I could have given you 30 seconds warning. I'll do that next time. Peter, would you mind starting? And I'll ask Moumita to follow.
Sure. Sorry to bend the rules a little bit, but I'd like to mention two inequities, and even if I don't have time to talk about both of them in good detail. One is the existence of APCs, the prominence of APCs, the unaffordability of APCs. But the other is the dominance of English and the relative dearth of multilingual research. But let me talk first about APCs. APCs essentially block authors the way subscriptions formerly blocked readers. And people who favor open access want to enfranchise readers by removing paywalls, but we should also want to remove paywalls for authors. And of course, they are often gone, but they're often present, and we should work on removing the ones that still exist. And right now, I think the growth of APCs are actually growing rather than diminishing. APCs are inequitable because they simply exclude authors who cannot find money to pay them. Most APCs don't necessarily come from the author out of pocket. They come from the author's university or the author's funder. But many authors are at universities that don't have the money or aren't willing to pay these on their behalf, or they get their research funded by a funder that isn't willing to pay them on their behalf, or their research is unfunded. And then there are independent scholars who don't have universities to draw upon. Very often, when authors can't get one of their sponsors to pay the APC on their behalf, it does fall to them to find the money. Some do and some don't. This is an economic barrier that excludes some authors from publishing, and it's completely independent of the quality of their research. So the existence of APCs excludes research that might be very, very good. That's harmful to them. And it's harmful to us because we don't get to read the research that we would like to be able to read. That's, in short, the problem. There are two broad solutions. One of them is no APC open access journals, diamond open access journals. They're growing. That's very good. They've existed, or they were, let's put it another way, they were the majority. Most open access journals were actually diamond, and we knew that starting in about 2005, but it was widely ignored for more than 10 years. I was one of the people who kept trying to beat the drum to get more attention on that fact. It's still the case that most open access journals are diamond, even though most articles published in open access journals are from APC-based journals. But the other solution is green open access or repository-based open access. That's also existed from the beginning, but most people's attention, most people in the open access movement, and certainly most bystanders who are not deeply involved in the movement, focus on open access journals instead of open access repositories. But repositories can solve all of these problems. There are some harmful misunderstandings about open access journals, for example, that they're limited to inferior versions, or that they can't carry open licenses, or that they always are embargoed. None of that's true. I'd be happy to say more about that. But the two solutions we should look at are green and diamond open access, or no APC open access journals and open access repositories. But let me just say something about multilingual research for a minute. I'm a native speaker of English, and I benefit from the fact that my native language is the lingua franca for research. I realize I have an unfair or unearned advantage in getting my own work published. The language I know second best is German, and I don't know it very well at all. If I had to publish my research in German, I would not publish anything. Or if I would submit something, it's very likely to be rejected. Speakers whose first language is not English suffer from stress, rejection, language-based discrimination when their English is weak, or expense in getting English speakers to help improve their language, and certainly time. And ultimately, they suffer from the exclusion of their research perspectives from the global pool of research that all of us want to read. So let me call on those whose first language is English to pay attention to the fact that we're enjoying an unfair advantage. I don't want to do away with a lingua franca. That actually has benefits, but we can grow multilingual research without giving up the benefits of a lingua franca.
Thanks, Peter. Folks, if you have any questions for the speakers, please go ahead and drop them into the Q&A. I want you to have the chance to engage with them as well, even if we don't have time during the session. So thanks, Peter. Moumita, I'll invite you to go next, and then Thanos after Moumita, please. And yeah, let's go. Moumita, please.
Yeah, thank you. And Peter's comment about not being a native speaker, how it affects your scholarship, of course, resonates very well with me, because that's English is, of course, not my native language. And another shameful fact over there is that the editors are so insensitive to that factor. And they would probably, when the journal tries to sell you the some editorial package that would improve your English. Anyway, I don't want to go into that mode right now, but yeah, but I would want to emphasize again the article processing charge, because I feel that asking the authors to pay, even if it is from the grants, and Peter highlighted why it is so even difficult to get it from the grants for many researchers. So I would say article processing charge at this point is the real barrier to the open access. So, I mean, it's like thousands of dollars, and we have this absurd like numbers like $11,000 to publish a single paper. I know, I mean, of course, this is one extreme end of the APC spectrum, but on an average, APCs are around $2,000 for many of these major open access journal, and even for the hybrid journal, it is even higher. Just to give you a sense that how it feels, for example, a PhD student in India, how would they feel about it? So the monthly stipend here is around $500 per month. So it's almost 4 months oats of that stipend. I mean, it's just to show you how absurd the numbers could be for many of us. Also, I would like to point out to a recent paper published in 2023, how APC has created stratification among countries. This is a paper published in Quantitative Science Studies, and it showed that the researchers from the high and higher middle income countries publishes in journal with higher average APCs. And when it comes to the low middle income countries, the average APC, the journal they choose is lower. So you can clearly see the stratification. And this inequity is on rise, as already Peter mentioned. I would even point out to this creation of the journal Quantitative Science Studies, QSS. It's a prominent journal in the field of scientometrics. So for who doesn't know what scientometrics is, it's a field which deals with measurement of scientific activities, or I would say research on research. Now in 2019, the entire editorial board of a flagship journal in the field of scientometrics called Journal of Infometrics resigned. This journal was with one of the big commercial publishers. So the entire editorial board resigned over the concern of very high APC. And they started this new journal, QSS, with MIT Press. Now, currently, the Journal of Infometrics charges APC around $4,000 to make an article open access, and operates as a hybrid journal, whereas QSS is an open access journal and charges $800. So the point I wanted to make here, that you can see that you get the same quality of publication at much lower price. So I hope I have been able to make my point clear why I say that the APCs are unsustainable and unjustified, and why I see that as the major barrier of open access publishing at this point. And coming back to the solutions that are available, of course, Peter mentioned, and I would again reiterate the same fact, Diamond Open Access Journals, which is now backed by many funding agencies, and even European Commission also also said something about it, like non-commercial models and diamond models. But I see that the journal prestige and disciplinary behavior as a barrier, because people are so hesitant to choose the Diamond Open Access Journal. They don't consider it as prestigious as many others. In this regard, I see the subscribe to open model as one of the promising option at this point. We can discuss this in the Q&A. However, I feel that we need to also do more experiments, because we are stuck to a single model for centuries. And I think that the peer-reviewed preprints and other initiatives taken, such as in eLife, need to be explored as alternative. We need more innovation in scholarly publishing and looking in new ways to dissemination of knowledge in the digital era. Thank you.
Moumita, thanks very much. Thanos, and then Sarah.
Yes. So thanks for the question. I think at the risk of repeating some of the wonderful points that Peter and Moumita made, I have the sense that we have reached a consensus on the need for open access. I mean, many stakeholders in the scientific knowledge production ecosystem acknowledge they have already implemented the open access framework or are moving towards it. And yet, data suggests that only researchers in the global north or those affiliated with well-funded institutions can read and publish science. And they do this mainly in the English language, within the Western knowledge canon, fragmenting or leaving out other knowledge systems, such as those of the indigenous peoples. The prestige industry, fueled by corporate scientific publishing and an outdated academic research system, excludes much of the world's research capital. Scientists who cannot afford to publish, who self-censor and change their research focus away from local and regional needs because a prestigious global North journal may not accept their work, who do not focus on community needs in the community's language. There is a tremendous gap and inequality globally that article processing charges and transformative agreements have not remedied. At the same time, we quickly put scientific output back behind paywalls after the unprecedented exchange of data and scientific information during the last pandemic that achieved to decode the virus's DNA and to create a vaccine in record time. So I think one should wonder, did COVID-19 patients deserve faster resolution than cancer or Alzheimer's patients, just to name a few? The open access model in Latin and South America, based on large-scale repositories, has been forward-looking, inclusive, strengthening biodiversity and knowledge productions and access for all, avoiding restrictive copyright regimes. And yet, this is also now being challenged. Other promising collective funding initiatives surfaced, such as Knowledge Unlatched, Scope 3 for particle physics, Code from Open University, to name only a few. I'm sure there are thousands. We are asked to ensure universal open access to the record of science, not only publications, both for authors and readers, with no barriers to participation, in particular, barriers that are based on ability to pay, institutional privilege, language, or geography. Partnerships of libraries and funders directly perhaps can leverage some of that power that funders have. Thank you.
Thanos, thank you. I will pull out some of the things that are coming out when we finish this section, but first let's hear from Sarah, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I don't think I'm going to say anything dramatically different to the three previous speakers, but to me, the inequality now within open access publishing has really moved into that paying to publish situation, and also that peer-to-peer discussion part of academic advancement. So the ability to pay to attend conferences or interact with your colleagues from around the globe, wherever they might be. Not quite open access, but still part of an open research infrastructure if we want to have true open debate around academic discoveries. But APC model is also one that we've all picked up on, and the fact that there's now this shift to pay to publish, and the fact that that creates a different type of inequality within the publishing ecosystem. So, I could be really controversial here and say, are subscriptions really that bad? You shouldn't really say that in an open access conference, perhaps, but alongside green open access publishing models, perhaps there is still a future for some sort of subscription model. And we can see that being adopted within initiatives such as Subscribe to Open, within Read and Publish deals, and even within that community action plan that PLOS are developing. It's sort of allowing publishers and those organizations to manage their open access publishing in a different type of way without the author paying directly every single time they want to publish a paper. So have we all got the solutions yet for what financial models we're going to have going forward? No, probably not. We need more experimentation, and we need different ways of thinking about how we fund the journals that we want to see going forward. That leads me to another point. Do we need all the journals that we currently have in order for us to publish the work that we want going forward? Is there a better way of presenting that work linked with the repositories that Peter's mentioned, linking with preprint servers? Do we need to rethink how that collective base of knowledge is published under an open research future? Then you can flip that round and say, okay, we're all talking about how we pay for this now. There's another part of the publishing ecosystem and industry, how much these things cost to deliver. Is there a better way that we could all be working to think about our workflows and our solutions to producing our journals and ensuring that our work is disseminated around the globe? And that could include using AI tools that are being developed to help address language barriers as authors are submitting their papers. So is there a better financial solution that helps us reduce our costs, whilst also allows us to experiment with different ways for the journals to be funded? Jen wanted us to find solutions. I haven't got the solution, but I think we need more experimentation, and I think we need to be brave to work together to try and achieve that.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Okay, I'm going to tap the audience at the same time here. So I'm just popping a link to a poll into the chat. And my question for the audience is, what are some of the promising initiatives you can name that alleviate inequities in open access or have the potential to? So I really appreciate how the speakers are helping to hone in on the challenges, the barriers that we face, but as a takeaway for today, we want to talk about the solutions. So reflecting on what I'm hearing so far, that some of the barriers we feel strongly about, the ones that we think are the most severe in terms of creating inequity, are paying to publish, so APCs, both the having an APC to begin with, and then the high fees that are often associated with having a fee at all. The lingua franca, having everything in one language. I want to say researcher adoption of different models. So, but at the same time, I think that we're getting some great solutions. So, Sarah, I think you brought up a number there, but the group together has talked about diamond journals as an alternative to APCs. So I'm going to speak for a moment, and then I'm going to ask the panelists to remind the group how diamond journals might be funded. So if you could prepare to answer that for me in a moment, I'd appreciate that. We've highlighted green publishing as a solution or alternative to APCs. We've talked about subscribe to open. So folks popping links into the chat, please keep doing that. I appreciate that, because not everyone on the meeting will be familiar with all of the initiatives we're referring to. So we refer to subscribe to open. We also refer to reviewed preprints and eLife doing that. eLife isn't the only group. ASAP Bio advocates for reviewed preprints. I think EMBO might be another group, but folks, again, please help me out with some links. And CAP, which is a community action program from the Public Library of Science. I want to remind us of Claire's opening comments that, in this retrospection kind of pause we're doing as a community, we're having to come to terms with the fact that there is no one financial model that's working for open access. And so here in our community, we want to support the development of lots of things. But I think one of the messages we're hearing clearly is that APCs is not good. We also talked about the work of our Latin American colleagues. Again, there are links, but this meeting here has discussed many times the important projects happening in Latin America. So please refer back to those to educate yourself on what's going on there and see how you might be inspired. So before we move to our next topic, can I ask our panelists, anyone could step forward and just remind us of some of the funding models behind Diamond Open Access?
I'll start. In the early years when I was beating the drum to get people to pay attention to the fact that most journals were Diamond, I felt the burden to explain how they funded themselves because almost nobody knew they existed, let alone that they were the majority. And nobody had done a study of how they were funded. They were the majority, there were thousands of them, but nobody had systematically studied their business models. And I have to say that's still true today, and that's an embarrassment to the entire open access movement. So I have anecdotal knowledge of how some of them are funded, and I can mention some of the models, but the first fact is there are many different ways that they're funded, and we still need someone to look systematically at how many of them or all of them are funded. So we have all the models in front of us, and a given journal can look at many, many different models before deciding whether it could go that route. One of them, though, I'll put it another way, all of them have something in common. The journals have to be subsidized. They're not going to get money from the authors or the author's sponsor. They're not going to get money from the readers or the reader's sponsor. So they need to get their operating expenses from some other source. Let's call that a subsidy. Now, these subsidies can come from governments. They can come from scholarly societies. They can come from nonprofit organizations. I've advised several journals that wanted to move to Diamond on how they could do this. And one recommendation that worked for many of them was to find not just one, but a collection of nonprofit organizations devoted to the topic on which the journal published. In one case, it was a subspecialty in medicine. So find some nonprofits that care very much about that subspecialty and ask them to pay a fraction of your expenses. Let's say you find 10 nonprofits. Well, ask each one of them to pay 1/10 of your operating expenses. That's much easier than asking one of them to pay all of your expenses. And in every case, they were able to do that. One journal asked, well, what do we give them, or what did they get out of this? And the answer is, first, they get a high quality, peer-reviewed, open access journal in the field that they care about. That's a huge benefit to them. But secondly, they get public thanks, and they're a nonprofit organization, and they care a lot about that. That's one model that works. Overlay journals are another model that works. That is, these are basically free-floating editorial boards that take submissions every which way, including from preprint repositories, and they peer review them their own way, and there are many different ways. And then they put the approved peer-reviewed publications back in open access repositories. So the publishing infrastructure is the existing network of open access repositories. And if there are any expenses, they're just in doing the peer review, facilitating peer review. And I'm not saying that's free, but it's very inexpensive compared to also running a publishing platform. If you piggyback on top of the existing network of open access repositories, things get much cheaper. I'll stop with those two.
That's great. Thanks very much, Peter. So I'm gonna shimmy on to our next topic. Again, Bernie, if it's okay, I'm encouraging folks to go ahead and answer questions in the Q&A because I don't think we're going to get time to address questions that the participants have, and I would like them to get the benefit of reactions from the speakers. So I'm going to go back and close my poll in just a moment, but let's get going with our next question. So Moumita, I'm going to ask you to start this one, and then Thanos to follow, and then Sarah, and then Peter. So the next question, we're changing tack altogether here. There's again, these are the themes identified by the program committee that we really want to try and think about taking action, stop talking and start taking action. So our theme is open infrastructure, and the question for our panelists is, why is using open source systems important to open access, if you feel it is? And again, what can be done to support their proliferation? Moumita, could you start us off, please?
Yeah, Thank you, Jen. Yeah, it's a question that, of course, I was thinking for quite a long time, and we also started to ask ourselves this question, even as a researcher, that do we really need to stick to the system of journals, which has really not embraced many of the digital advancements that we have seen. So we could have done much better, and that's where this thought comes that we need open source infrastructure where we are not answerable to let's say the shareholders of a company, but we are answerable to ourselves. So a community-led model. And also it will provide us equity. I would again share some of my own experience, because again, I represent a scholarship from Global South where we lack there are a lot of issues. And one of that is that I hear from my colleagues who works in public health and trying to publish in Global Public Health Journal, and they get text rejection with a note saying that any country-specific study is not their focus. When the same journal had published in their previous issue a global not country-specific study. So how fair are this assessment? And why not make such assessment option open? So coming from that angle, I feel that the peer-reviewed preprint models, open peer-reviewed preprints model, where community come together and drive this, is one of the best solution that we can have, because we have open source softwares to run such kind of platforms. Of course, there would be some costs associated, and Peter had already said how we can go around those expenses. But I think that we even have to move away from the journal-based system that we are stuck into. I mean, of course, I'm not telling that only one model, but peer-reviewed preprint is one of the model that we can think of where community can come, and we can make the peer review also open to increase the transparency, because we already had seen in so much of problem because of the lack of transparency, both in the peer review and as well as also in the whole scientific process. So that's why, of course, we can link the data. There are data infrastructure, for example, Dryad is one of those, but also we have Zenodo or Figshare. So we can deposit our data and also link it to the preprint. So it would again be more decentralized. And again, we now know that we can have this peer preprints, which are peer reviewed. Each version of it can have its own DOI, which is citable. And the data that is linked with this system is also citable, because that also have its own DOI. And since the peer review we are making open, that also adds to the transparency. And I also feel that this will also change the behavior of peer reviewers. They would be more compassionate while doing the peer review instead of doing that kind of text rejection. And we know also the communication would be rapid. I mean, I know that many people argue that it may spread misinformation. But if we educate ourselves, the researchers and non-researchers alike, that how to use a preprint and what is peer review, when it is peer reviewed, then we can address all these fears. We definitely have to embrace the new models. And again, there is no copyright transfer. So overall, I feel that this is a model that can work. And at International Science Council, we actually had worked, our steering group also worked a lot on this to see if this is a good model. And they actually, most of them feel that this is a model that is really a futuristic one. And we can, as a global community, the researchers and the funder, they can come together to support these community-led models, have some incentives for it, for example, in the research assessment process. Overall, all these steps will probably take this forward. Yeah. Thank you, Jen. That's my answer to your question.
Thanks very much, thanks very much, Moumita. Thanos, will you go next, please?
Yes, thank you. So regarding open source systems, well, yeah, of course, I think using open source systems is important in the context of open science. I mean, open source software development promotes collaboration, innovation, and accessibility through communities that created in order to address specific challenges and needs. The development of open access repository software software that caters for the management of the whole life cycle of scientific outputs, including data and code, I think has been spearheading the development and progress towards a more global and equitable scientific commons. Worth noting here is the supra-construction of the Coalition of Open Access Repositories, an international association that brings together individual repositories and repository networks to build capacity, align policies and practices, interoperability, and act as global voice for the repository community. UNESCO, in its working group on open science, declares that open science infrastructures now number in the thousands. But there are, however, increasing calls for interoperability and attention to sustainability of those infrastructures. In the last United Nations Open Science Conference, it was highlighted that we need to direct funding to open science infrastructures that prioritize, of course, the advancement of the science as a public good over private interests. Within the context of open science, I think there are two initiatives that probably are worth noting here. The Global Sustainability Coalition for Open Science Services was formed in 2017, and Invest in Open Infrastructures was formed in 2018. So SCOS, the first one, the Coalition for Open Access Services, provides a coordinated cost-sharing framework that will enable the open science community to support the non-commercial services on which it depends, allowing stakeholder institutions to participate in direct funding of essential infrastructure. To date, they have 11 infrastructures that have been funded with over $6 million US in pledged funds from over 335 institutions as of June 2023, if I'm not mistaken. Invest in Open Infrastructure works to increase the investment in and adoption of open infrastructure to further equitable access and participation in research and to provide targeted evidence-based guidance and support to institutions and funders of open infrastructure. IOE has created a catalog of open infrastructure services as a means of standardizing information about 4 open infrastructure services. And they aim to expand to 70 services by December 2023. They launched the Open Infrastructure Fund back in 2022 with a participatory funding summit to determine priority themes for allocation, with 60% of the funds reserved for projects in low and middle income countries. So these are just 2 of the initiatives, but I think it's important to note that open infrastructure is, lies at the heart of open science. So this probably we should have a consensus with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Super. Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Open infrastructure, having worked in organizations and publishers where we've used open infrastructure, you can see the benefits of working as a collective. There's the COCO initiative out there, which has an open source code for a manuscript tracking system, for example. And there are others that are working within the industry to provide open source solutions across the whole of that researcher workflow. Now, what you gain from that is you have your own version of the code that suits you, but you gain from being part of the community and learning from all the updates and the developments that everyone has. That brings huge benefits if you have the developers in-house that allow you to take advantage of that open infrastructure. But it can create another barrier linked to our first question in terms of you don't have those people in-house to take advantage of that open infrastructure. And that means perhaps you can't move to using the open infrastructure that you would like in an open research world because you are constrained in a different way. We've also seen a lot of different startups come into the industry to try and find solutions to some of the problems within our whole researcher workflow, from preprints through to manuscript tracking system, through to workflows, through to editing, through to production. And a lot of them have huge potential and are super exciting. And then we see, even last week we saw it, we see them perhaps being purchased or merged in with bigger organizations or bigger publishing firms within the industry. Now that means perhaps we lose that flexibility, we lose that ability to work together and find solutions. And it also means that smaller publishers are paying bigger publishers for part of their service workflow. So if we go back to what open science and open research is all about, it's about creating a more even playing field for everyone. So by having that open infrastructure, you allow yourself to do that. And I think it's it's within the whole of that research life cycle, which is what Thanos mentioned. It's from the point of idea, really, through to the point of whatever we say the final publication is, that allows the data to be stored, to be created, for everyone to interact with that throughout the whole of the life cycle. I don't think we have the open source solutions to that would allow us all to benefit from that when we're trying to figure out how we flip our journals to open access, or how we launch new journals on an open access business model, or whatever that business model might be, and how we collect the payments. We don't have the solutions yet for the different places within the organization. So yet again, we need to be working together as a collaborative to try and find our way forward in a way that's equitable and fair. And I'm going to hand to Peter, because I think he's got way more solutions to this question than the rest of us. So back to you, Jen.
Peter, please go ahead.
I've got preferences. We'll see whether they are solutions. I'm going to answer the question narrowly about the benefits of open source infrastructure. Open infrastructure as such goes way beyond open source to certain kinds of social organization and governance. But I want the platforms that host open access research to be open source software, and I'll explain why. The main reason is that it resists acquisition and enclosure. It can't be bought and laid down. It can't be bought and taken home. It's like, you know, playing an informal game of football. Nobody can take the ball and go home. Software, open source software cannot be bought. In that sense, we still have it and we can still use it. If it's good, it serves our purposes. Nobody can take it away from us. A corporation can buy the people who have been building the software and the organizations that have been organizing the building of the software, maybe even funding it. But if they do, and that's happened, the software remains behind in the hands of the community to use as they please, and they still have undiminished rights to use it. So in that sense, it resists acquisition and closure. If there's an existing repository of open access content and people and organizations behind it have somehow changed their minds about open access, or they've been acquired, then not only does the community still have the software, but if the content was under open licenses, then all the content can stay behind as well. That is, it can be copied over to the new version of the platform, the reincarnation of the platform. That's the main thing, but there are a couple of smaller things. Some open access platforms, which were not open source, have been acquired in that sense in close. SSRN was bought by Elsevier. Bpress was bought by Elsevier. Open Research Europe, which is based on F1000, was bought by Taylor and Francis. They all bought these platforms in order to host open access, which is the way the corporations diversify. But that means they are obligated, sometimes under contract, to provide open access for a little while, but they don't have to provide it forever. They can change their minds. They see some benefit in diversification and having one foot in the open access world. But they might change their mind about that because they're profit-driven corporations. And we don't know today what will be profitable tomorrow or 10 years from now. If they see more profit in not providing open access, then they'll stop providing open access. If the platforms were open source and in the hands of academic-led or community-led organizations, that wouldn't happen. The mission or the priorities would still be in the hands of the academic world, the universities and maybe the funders who have academic interests at heart. What I don't want is for platforms that host open access to research to make decisions about what kind of access to provide under what terms and conditions based on what will be most profitable. Profit-driven or profit-maximizing access decisions could mean the end of open access. So we want a combination of open source plus community control. Two other small points on community, not so small in practice. Communities can adapt open source software to meet local needs. If there's a really good platform, a feature-rich platform that just happens not to have a certain feature that your local community needs, you can add it. You may not have the funds or the talent to add it today, but in principle, you can add it. You don't have to beg some big corporation to listen to you and to take your needs to heart and to provide the function that you need. You simply have to find the people. And the same goes for interoperability. What we want are platforms that are interoperable. Some of the best platforms are not interoperable with each other. If all of our platforms were open source, then over time, we could make them all interoperable. It would be something that communities could do for themselves, again, without begging the platforms to give up what might be exclusive control or network effects that give them reasons to resist interoperability.
Thanks very much, Peter. Okay, audience, I'm going to invite you to also say, how can we support the use of open source systems and open access publishing with a poll I've just dropped into the chat. So we're going to need to shimmy on to our next topic, but I think what we're hearing from the speakers today is that this is important. The adoption and support of open infrastructure is most certainly important as an impetus, a driver, a supporter of innovation and collaboration, and the interconnection of research objects that helps facilitate discovery and working with available results across the life cycle. Some of the initiatives that we see that are good and we want to support are SCOS and IOI. Vanessa, thanks for dropping that link in, and thanks for the link to IOI as well. And I think Peter's a key point here is about maintaining control, keeping those platforms in community control and open source. So let's see what the audience has to say through the poll. And again, panelists, please do engage with the audience in the Q&A, because there's just not enough time in the world to take on all of these really good topics. So so let's move on to the next, and let's try and be quick so that we can summarize and share back some of the feedback we're getting here. So for this last question, I'm going to start with Sarah, then move to Peter, then move to Moumita, and then conclude with Thanos. And the question that you have next is, again, I really appreciate your succinctness. So what do you feel is the most significant barrier to engaging with open access for the individual researcher? So I realize there are lots of different research communities with lots of different interests, but what would you say is the most significant barrier to engagement with open access? And what are the most promising initiatives designed to address this barrier? Sarah, please get us started.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Massive question, short time frame. What are the biggest issues? We're going to come back to payment. We don't have solutions, but payment is one of the biggest barriers for authors to engage with open access. And we need to make sure our communication strategies are strong and that people know why this matters. Perhaps researchers don't care about that long-term impact of open access in the same way that many of us do who are here today talking, and we need to be better at explaining to them why it matters. And then it's about cost to make it happen and finding solutions so it's equitable. Within that equity piece, we need to think about gender diversity, and we need to think about maximizing the use of the global community to help support our publishing program. By that, I put in peer review pressure as well, and encouraging more of our global community to be editors or involved with the peer review process as we move forward into an open research future. Data, to me, is going to help solve quite a lot of this. We need to get better at using data and finding solutions to what our authors want and what the researchers want. Mindful of how things might be different on a regional basis, and I think some of the solutions coming into fruition about regional payments or looking at regional variations in how journals are priced is going to be pretty interesting to see develop over the coming years. And I will leave it there in the being succinct.
Thank you, Sarah. Peter, will you tackle the question next, please?
Sure. First, I agree with Sarah. Payment is a major obstacle for researchers. So I'll supplement that. Prestige is another one. Promotion and tenure committees want junior faculty to publish in the journals that the committee regards as prestigious. Sometimes prestige is a direct function of impact factors. Sometimes it's just a fuzzy reputational thing that is independent of quantitative metrics. But prestige is a barrier because some prestigious journals are open, but some are not. And if junior faculty feel pressure from their promotion and tenure committee to publish in a subset of journals, not the ones they would have chosen for themselves, then they're constrained. They need not be constrained. This points to the importance of the long-term goal of changing research assessment practices. I say long-term, it's not easy. That's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's a reason to keep working on it so that it will happen one day. If we care less about where work is published, the prestige barrier disappears. One form this takes is that the committees, promotion and tenure committees, will expect junior faculty to publish in a set of journals they regard as high in impact or high in prestige or high in quality. Of course, open access journals can be high in all of those things, but many of the journals favored by the committee are not open. Those junior faculty often want to make their work open. Sometimes they're required to make their work open by their funder, and they feel like the rope in a tug of war. The funder wants it to be open, the committee wants it to be closed, and they have to satisfy both. That's a painful dilemma for them. We can solve it. Green open access is the solution. Junior faculty in that position should publish in the journals their committee favors because we want them to be tenured. We want them to stay in the system and work for open access from the inside. But they can still make the same work, the same peer-reviewed research, open access through a repository. There are no promotion and tenure committees anywhere that object to that practice. So we have to spread the word that green open access solves that particular dilemma for ECRs. And then long-term, let's work on making journal prestige and impact factor unimportant and the quality of research all important.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Peter. Moumita, will you tackle the question next, please?
Yeah. I would thank Peter to touch upon the prestige factor, because that's exactly what I felt that one of the major barriers with engaging with open access, because we currently might be even having Diamond Open Access Journal or other avenues where we can publish open access without paying, but we are not doing it because of the prestige factor of it and how as a researcher we get assessed. So it brings me to another bigger question, that what are we publishing? And I would like to give it one example that how prestige is hindering the science is from one of the research we recently conducted in collaboration with CWTS Netherlands. And here we look into the biomedical research happening in India from 2015 to 2019, biomedical and health, and correlated to the disease burden of the country. And we get this disease burden data from the WHO database. And what we see is that there is a stark mismatch between the disease burden of India and the research priorities as measured in terms of publication. For example, 25% of our publication is dedicated to cancer, which is 5% of India's disease burden. So you can see as the similar mismatch we again see in Alzheimer, and we see very less research on diseases where the disease burden is quite high for India. And that is interestingly, we see that our publication very well correlate with the disease burden of high income country. And of course, I don't have to tell why, because journal prioritize those diseases in the publication. And researchers need such publication for career progression. And so if we don't also change this, we won't also be able to move towards we won't adopt other innovative solution as well. In this, I think the DORA Declaration Lenin Manifesto have created much needed awareness and momentum. QARA is also working towards implementation of responsible research assessment practices. As I see, Wellcome Trust, HHMI also implemented some of the bold responsible research assessment measure. So hopefully we will see the global community moving more towards these responsible practices.
Thanks, Moumita. Thanos, will you please close us out?
Yes. So thanks again for the question. I think there are two things that are too strong in my mind, but I'll leave one for the last question and concentrate on one here. Ines Soltz, the co-chair of the 15 group of scientists that prepared the Global Sustainable Development 2023 report that I mentioned at the opening, stated that we need to move from competition, cooperation to secure a viable future for humanity. So it's an essential change, since science, as far as I know, is based on competition. Success in politics is based on competition, at least in democracies. However, it is no longer about competition but about securing the public good, shared interests, viable solutions, and convergence. In my opinion, the significant barrier, and again, I risk repeating what our colleagues mentioned earlier, a significant barrier is to engage with open science in the current science culture. The research assessment system, including the infamous university rankings, as well as the intellectual property regimes. So new means of research assessment are needed to better align with and support the purpose of good knowledge creation in service to humanity and not private interests. Science and open access are public goods and not purely economic benefits. Publishing processes are essential for selecting out knowledge claims based on scientific methods and justifying what remains as full scientific knowledge. The current game of journal ranking, impact factors, and competition has nothing to do with knowledge, and in fact, gets in the way of open knowledge creation for the benefit of society. The current model also creates and reinforces hierarchies and economic hegemonies, language and cultural barriers, as well as gender asymmetries. Moving beyond the journal publishing model into an open network platform model would facilitate perhaps worldwide access to research as well as scientific publications from more diverse researchers, returning to repositories here and the importance. To transition to open science, we require the shift in the culture of science. It's not easy, it's not going to happen in a week, but it is necessary. The International Science Council has put forward 8 principles to change the scientific publishing model, along with the concept, which I find very interesting, mission science. I think the latter is very much fitting to the universal open access publishing ecosystems and applied research. DORA declaration is promising. I'm still reading to understand where they are and what's the adoption and what's the monitoring mechanism. But I think it's quite promising. But what we need though is grassroots movements and monitoring of impact, while the rigorous, timely, and ongoing peer review must continue to play a key role in creating and maintaining the public record of science. So it comes back to us, as one of the scientists mentioned in the SDGs big conference this last weekend. If a country signs a declaration, what happens? I don't think many things happen. We are the ones that have to push forward solutions. And I'm delighted to see all these wonderful links and references in this chat. Thank you.
Wow, were we to stop talking now, that would be a remarkable and powerful place to end. In order to advance open science, we must change the culture of science, and it is up to us here and as individuals to make it happen. Thanos, thank you for that. I'm going to share another poll with the audience, which asks you now, what are some of the promising initiatives that you see to address barriers to researcher participation in open access? So I'm going to ask the panelists to share with us one closing thought about today's discussion. We need to wrap up by 10:15 or in about 7 minutes, depending on your time zone. So let's cover a couple more things first. So what I'm hearing about barriers to researcher participation, it has to do with payment and the costs of participation, and then making sure that we're equitable, as Sarah was saying, and in making it possible for different folks to participate whilst addressing costs, if that makes sense. Prestige is another key barrier, and I wanted to highlight Sarah's point about data and understanding what's happening with researchers so that we can better engage with them. On prestige, the underlying point is really about changing research assessment. And Peter has highlighted participation with green models in combination with publishing in your favorite journal as a good balance and a way to achieve both things. I've seen Dora mentioned, and I'm not sure we've mentioned Leiden. There was Cora, the acronym for an initiative in Europe that I only recently learned about at the CERN meeting, where European institutions are signing up to different approach to research assessment. So there are different frameworks out there, but as Thanos has just said, signing a declaration is one thing. At the end of the day, we're looking for responsible approaches to assessment, and organizations like Welcome are engaging with those. I won't possibly be able to summarize everything that Thanos has just said, but let us refer back to the work of the UN and the SDGs, and the underlying point here to move away from competition, move away from publishing and the economic good that has underpinned a lot of our work over these decades, and reconsider the creation and exchange of knowledge as a public good. I really appreciate that call to action to build a new system. Gosh, so much in here. Thanks for the opportunity to try and keep up with you. I'd like to get a closing thought. Let me try and reflect back on what I've heard as well, and then I'll ask our panelists to share a closing thought. So give me 1 minute to recap. So going back to our first question on initiatives, on key barriers and initiatives to alleviate inequities in open science. So what I heard from you, the audience highlighted library-based publishing. Really great to see that here. I'm looking at a word cloud. We'll share it later on. And second biggest is the Open Book Collective, followed by Subscribe to Open, DMS, OACIP, and preprints. So I think that a key takeaway for our first question is that we continue to pursue a lot of different approaches, and that our task, the thing that we can take away, I think I'm hearing, is that we need to continue to learn about these. So to understand Diamond, to understand Scope 3, and to pursue models that don't create barriers as the APC has done. And I want to draw attention to Peter's comment about paying attention to what our colleagues are in different areas of the world, or colleagues who just come from a different place and what they're going through. I appreciate that point about how stressful it is to engage in a language that isn't your own. So thank you for that takeaway. The takeaway for me on open infrastructure is that it's not perfectly solved, that the call to action for the community is to work together and to invest. So investing in systems like IOI and SCOS, and the results of the question of how we can support the use of open source systems in open access publishing from the audience. You highlighted OJS, that's nice and big and central. You've also said a modular architecture, paying staff positions, and working through library consortia. So I will stop there, and I'll share the poll results after, but let me go around to our panelists and ask you to share with us one call to action for the group assembled here, and give your remarks. What is the one thing that you would like to leave us with? Let's start with Thanos, and then go Sarah, Moumita, and Peter. Thanos, may I ask you to respond, please?
Thank you. Thanks again. I mean, this is a wonderful discussion. It's a pity we don't have time to discuss with the audience. So what I wanted to say, I think that, scientific output many times is produced on public funds and grants, including free public education. It cannot be managed in the same copyright category as the wonderful novels of William Faulkner. There's a difference between research outputs and creative works. We need immediate reform of intellectual property regimes to achieve universal and immediate open access, as stipulated by so many international bodies and declarations, academia, librarians, scientists, and policymakers. There is still hope, of course, to accelerate open science and open access even further and make it more equitable. Through international fora such as WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, a wider discussion is already initiated on the visiting licensing regimes of scholarly works. We need forward-looking and bold decisions, and I think all stakeholders understand their agency, and I think we're all more or less ready to sit around the table. I know it's difficult. In many cases, the UN itself has not opened the discussion on at least assigning Creative Commons license for copyrighted works, stating, however, that at least the UN resolutions and related normative documents remain strongly in the public domain. No change has happened just by signing a declaration, as I just mentioned. Change is spearheaded by change champions and through grassroots approaches inspired by declarations that put the benefits of humanity at the forefront. So I think we definitely need to put on our agenda the revisiting of the intellectual property regimes. We need to change the licensing approaches. And I leave you with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moumita, did I say Moumita? No, Sarah. Sarah, please go ahead.
Yeah, it was me next, but it's all right, Jen. Thanks. How to follow that? I'm going to try and be really succinct. I think it's clear that we need to change how we operate as a publishing industry. We need to cooperate, we need to be a community, and we need to find solutions to not just open access, but open research going forward. We need to remind ourselves why this matters and the impact that open research can have in solving some of the greatest problems that we're facing. And one sort of idea to throw out there to the community is, do we need to think about all of that data as perhaps a living, breathing research manuscript from the moment of idea through to the moment of publication, but publication never really ends because you add to your knowledge output. Your peer reviewers stay with you for however long that project lives and breathes. That's surely the ultimate aim of open research, how we share and engage with the information that our academics around the globe are presenting to us. So I think we need to work together, societies, publishers, everyone. We need to find solutions.
Thanks, Sarah. Moumita.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in the same line with what Sarah was saying, because we cannot stuck with an century-old model. We need to move forward to embrace the whole research workflow as a whole project, or the research workflow, which is not just a single static output like a paper. And to achieve that, of course, we need as a community to come together and deliver the solution. It can never happen without us, the community, working for it. And that's why I would also like to emphasize that with this generative AI, which has come right now as like a bang, it is going to create a huge impact down the line. So we cannot just think of the old model as our ultimate, and we have to engage to a different ways of working as a community. Thank you.
Thank you, Moumita. Peter, will you close us out?
Yes, thanks to all the panelists. We focused today on some big problems and some big solutions, and the fact that they're big means that none of us can solve them as individuals, and even collectively, we cannot solve them tomorrow. For example, we can't eliminate APCs tomorrow. We can't open up infrastructure tomorrow. We can't reform research assessment tomorrow. So the first thing is lend your weight to these long-term goals, understanding that they're long-term. Do that with the right mix of patience and impatience. And in the meantime, here are two things you can do as an individual right now. First, when you hear misunderstandings about open access, correct them. It's like when you hear an insulting joke, call out the person who tells the joke. For example, when somebody says or assumes that all open access journals, that all open access is journal-based and ignores the fact that much of it is repository-based, just call them out and say that's false. When they say all open access journals, or even most of them, charge APCs, call them out, that's false. When they say that repository-based open access is always embargoed, must be embargoed, cannot carry open licenses, call them out, that's false. And second, finally, at the very least, please make your own work open access. You can't solve the global problem yourself, but you can solve your individual problem yourself. You can make your own work open. You can make it green or gold, that is through journals or through repositories. Do it prospectively, starting today, if you're not already doing it. And then as you find time, do it retroactively for all your past publications.
Thank you, Peter. Incredible discussion. Thank you so much to the organizers for the opportunity for myself to participate here. Thank you so much to each of our panelists for your time and your insights and all of your incredible experience. Thank you for sharing that with us today. If you're available, please do stick around to wrap up any questions in the Q&A or respond to any of the comments in the chat. We'd appreciate that. Thank you to the participants for engaging with us in all of these modes. There's so much richness here. We need all of our channels to try and cover the ground. So I'm going to be back at the end of the conference, and I may share a few more reflections on this. For now, we're going to wrap up and have a break. Bernie, I had 15 minutes, but I've used 5 of them. So we should have a 10-minute break. You're welcome to linger here, continue chatting, or disappear and come back in 10 minutes. The Zoom link for the day is the same. So again, deep gratitude to each of you for participating today. Gratitude to the organizers and all of you for participating. Great to see you, and see you shortly.